All right, so it is almost 10:15 in New York or East Coast of the United States, and we have one of our most special guests today, Ian Sandler, and he's special for several reasons. First of all, Forcier is one of the longest partners of X-Cultures. We've been together for must be at least 2 years now, something like that. So 3, 4 times probably. And also Forcier is known for being the most, I guess, responsive and supportive company. So they're extremely good at answering questions, at organizing webinars. They will be going with us on the X-Culture Symposium cruise, on the cruise ship this fall in about a month or 2 months from now. In fact, the company will be sending not only Ian Sandler, who is with us here today, but also there will be a couple other employees, including Natalie Forcier, who is the CEO, I guess, and the owner of the company. So they're very, very involved, and I wish more companies were this committed and this supportive. So this is a huge deal for us, and I really thank you for that. And so today we're going to talk to Ian, but we will not do our usual company introduction webinar. The reason we will not do it that way is because we have had a number of webinars in the past. They are recorded, and you can watch those webinars on this same webpage, X-Culture's webinar webpage. And those webinars will give you a good introduction to the company itself, as well as there were lots of interesting questions that Ian answered. Instead, today, I would like to focus more on feedback. And so what we will do is maybe we'll start just with a little introduction, but not so much of the company, but the industry in general. We noticed that some students have a hard time comprehending how this whole industry works. Maybe just a few words, as I said, not about necessarily Forcier, but more about the industry you guys work in, and maybe your place in that industry, how you fit in, who the main players are, projects, whatever else. And then the plan is to literally look at your answers, students. So maybe in the next webinar, we will even invite one or a couple teams that will do a presentation of what you have done so far, and then Ian or somebody else from Forcier will give you feedback. But now the project has just started, and you don't really have much to present yet, so we will do that later. But what we have last year's answers from the students who worked on essentially the same challenge. And we have those answers summarized. Some of them are excellent, but some of them may not be so good. In fact, some of them make absolutely no sense. And it's not always easy to see what's good and what's bad. And so what we'll do today, we will look at those answers one by one, at the most common at least ones, and then maybe receive some feedback as to why this one is good and this one is not good, so that when you work on these questions this semester, you know what constitutes a good answer, what to look for, and how to go about them. So yeah, maybe a few minutes, just 5 minutes, no more, about the industry in general, because we understand what the company is, but many people still have challenges with understanding this sort of business. Please.
Absolutely. Sure. So I think what's easiest to describe is there's two parts. There's international development, and then there's research. Forcier is a research firm that works with international development. So if we go really broad, what we work in is the humanitarian aid and international development sector. So that's all of the different projects that are working on helping people across the world. We do research for that sector. So I know that a lot of students, rightfully so, are probably a little confused because a lot of the suggestions are market research companies, and that's a little different. So we're not a research firm that does things like works for, I don't know, Home Depot and sees how customers think about them. We don't go into a country and we don't take a survey about what kind of drinks people like and what food they like so that we can give that to a private company. So we've done a little bit of private company research, but that's not what we do. That's market research. That is gauging what a market is for a product. And so that's what I think a lot of students have focused on. But we are an international development and social sciences research company. So simply what you could say we do largely is we evaluate the work of international development actors. So I would say that's 70% of our work. So you're someone like Save the Children or Oxfam or World Vision, the biggest international NGOs or nonprofits in the world. They're implementing a project in a fragile country, either before or afterwards or during the middle. We come in and we tell you if it's working, if it's efficient, if it's sustainable. So our work has to do with the development sector and, you know, reducing poverty, everything that comes with that. So that's really broad. It can be things like water and sanitation. It can be things like economic development, agriculture, you know, health. Anytime that a implementing organization, we call it, so one of those NGOs or private companies that is receiving money from a government donor makes a program, we're the third step. We're the one who's doing research on it. So it's the best way to look at it is you're a government donor, you're USAID, you're DFID in the British government, JICA, the Japanese, CETA, you know, Canadians. You give money to an organization to do work. That organization does the work, and then that organization contracts us to tell them how their work was. So it's that three-step process. So that's what I know, you know, we're not working directly usually for these governments, but for the organizations that the governments give money to.
So the work you do, is it usually kind of a mandated or required part of the project? Your government's so who is the entity, or at which stage is your work or services that you provide are required, I guess? Is that by the donors, by the companies that do it, or somebody else?
It's a good question. So it should be required for everyone, but unfortunately, M&E, or monitoring and evaluation, what we do is sometimes not budgeted for appropriately. So on a lot of these bigger projects, the governments require that they have a final evaluation that gives the government then a sense of how their money was spent. You know, was it, they gave them $20 million. Now, did that $20 million actually do anything? So without that final report, no one knows. So that's often a requirement. Usually they require the final evaluation as well as a baseline. So coming in and deciding what was the community, what was the place like in regards to these problems before the organization did anything, so that when you come in at the end, you can compare it to something. So that's often required by the governments. And then there are all kinds of different research projects that we do that are a little more bespoke. That just depends on funding, and that's usually all from the organizational level.
So then who exactly hires you? Would your employer be the government that gives
the middleman? So we're always hired directly by the implementing organization, not the government. And this is a good point though, to be a government contractor, to work directly for the US government, for the British government, that's the really massive projects. Those are the organizations that are winning $20 million research contracts. You know, they're doing $180 million in research a year. We're not quite there. You know, we're 5 years in, we're a small company, we're growing. You know, we do something like $6 million in revenue. And those are based on much smaller projects. They can be anywhere from $10,000 up until $1 million, you know, but we're being contracted just by the middle, because when you work up to that level of being contracted by the government, it's a whole nother game of, you know, intense research.
So could we describe you as some sort of auditors? You don't really do audit in a sense.
I guess you could call it like development auditing. So we're not like, you know, we're not like Deloitte or KPMG or those, you know, BCG, but a lot of those companies have a development wing. So they got their start and they're known for their financial auditing. And because of that, they can go into this kind of development work. So we do not do any financial auditing. We don't do a lot of operational efficiency, you could say. So we're not evaluating like where your money was spent. We're like down to the dollar. We're evaluating on if it worked, you know.
So then I assume in most cases you do some sort of like a pre and post and see if it made any difference, but you're not necessarily saying that the company spent the money, I don't know, spent too much on overhead costs and stuff like that.
No, we have nothing, you know, in that. You spent your money how you want to and how you did it. We're just going to tell you if it actually made an impact on the community. So we're not looking as much at the organization. We're talking to 1,000 people in the village. We're talking to people across the nation, and we're seeing, has your life changed for the better because of this project? So that's often the hardest part, is how do you isolate the intervention, it's called, you know, like if something has happened over 5 years, a lot of things have happened in that 5 years. How do you come down, and this is all based on your research design, how do you decide that it had to do with this specific program from this specific company? So that's the hardest part.
This is a fascinating area. I believe I mentioned before, my specialization in my studies was HR program effectiveness evaluation, or as they call it, utility analysis. So it's not always easy to isolate the effect of, let's say, a new compensation system, or maybe a new, I don't know, software that the company uses, and how that
absolutely. And a lot of the time, yeah, a lot of the time we do not do the baseline. So we get contracted just for the final evaluation, which means we have no idea what that other company, how they design their indicators or anything like that. So it's very difficult. If you want the best success, you do both the base and the end line, and you're the one who designed all of these questions so that you can measure them throughout the project. But it can be very difficult when you're just contracted at the end for a very small amount of money to do it really quickly and just provide answers. And that's a lot of what we have to work with as a company.
I assume even in the ideal scenario, you probably even want to have some sort of like a control group, maybe, a similar county that didn't get that aid, and you compare them, but
that's tough. That's hard to convince people to fund. It's expensive. I can't stress enough, research is chronically underfunded, and it is, in my eyes, although I am biased, the most important part of the process, because you can spend all this money to do all this work, but if you don't know what went right and what went wrong, you're just going to make the same mistakes. You could leave a community after 5 years and it could go straight back into the same problems that it had because you did not measure if it was sustainable.
Especially if you're a government that gives money over and over again, you definitely want to learn first from what worked, what hasn't.
Absolutely.
Super important. Okay, well, hopefully that clarifies the issue about the industry in general. And so Jan has copies of the files that I'm going to go through now, and maybe we can even share some of the things on the screen. Let me see if we can do that. But so the idea is here, let's take a quick look at some of your answers that the students provided and see if you can, if Jan can provide some feedback, and you students can watch and perhaps better understand as to, what is a good answer and what is not such a good answer. And perhaps let me try to see if I can share the screens and then just show what I see here. And okay, so the first question was Forcier competitors, and I hope that you can see my screen and you can see some of the examples here. And so when we look at the list, I'll just provide some of the most commonly provided answers. Like, for example, about 80% of the teams in the early track said that Altai Consulting is one of the competitors. Then we had Field Africa, another, almost all teams, Integrity, African Evaluation Association, Okan Consultancy, and then a number of other companies that were provided only by one or two of the teams. And so I'm just curious, Jan, if you look at this list, any feedback, any comments? I mean, are those good choices? Are they bad choices? I personally would particularly be interested in hearing which ones are bad choices or not really competitors, and why. And so how do students select that? What exactly do they pay attention to select companies that do what you do and not select companies that are completely irrelevant in this context?
Sure. I was incredibly impressed because I would say 3 of our biggest competitors are in those first couple of selections. So Altai Consulting and Integrity are right up our alley, as well as another firm called ORB. That is somewhere I did see on the list, but it was there.
Oh, it's alphabetical, so it must be then, yeah.
Yeah. But those are fantastic. So what I always say is there are 2 kind of competitors that we have. Or 3. A lot of people are used to right there, ORB.
Incidentally, it's only about 20% of the teams that found that one. And so
our niche is very rare. There are not a lot of international organizations that do projects of this size in these places. It's very rare. So, which is why we're successful. But I would say that Altai and ORB and Integrity, they are similar to us, but we still do it differently. We often compete against a lot of local firms. So a ton of these that are on here, actually, you could leave it right on this part, Voss. So this is a great example. So ORB is an example of someone like us. They're an international research firm. They're based in London. Their US side is based in Charlottesville. They go and they work in these places for evaluation. They're different because they are, an office of 15 people, and they go and they subcontract local people when they work, whereas we have full-time staff in these locations. But they're the ones that compete for the size of project. If you look at Oxford Policy Management, they're someone that would actually partner with us to do work. They're way bigger than us. So as you can see, 37 years in operation, global experience. They're doing the same kind of projects that we do, but at a much more massive scale. They're the kind that is working directly with the British government. They will win a project, and then they will contract us to help them in a place. So they're the big dogs that one day we aspire to be. And then if you go down one more to, what was it, Ocon Consulting? That's a great example of, someone I had never heard of. But there are tons of these local consultant firms that are very country specific, and they work in either one country or a couple, like in this. Maybe they have like a little network. So we're often competing against local firms. They are excellent at data collection, but sometimes they lack the analytical experience, the report writing, often English experience. So that's where we kind of have our competitive edge over them.
Could there be also some sort of bias among the local companies, like incentive to maybe overstate the results?
I mean, it's a good point. I mean, maybe, but I would say for the most part, no. I'd say they're pretty objective, and the ones at least that last. If they do have those biases, they don't last very long as a firm. And the third thing, PricewaterhouseCooper. So I see you have the address there in Alexandria, Egypt, but we know they're the top 3 largest consulting firm in the world.
Right.
The day that they are our competitors, I will be very pleased. But that is quite far off.
Probably a bad choice too, because they do all kinds of stuff. I mean, what you do for them is just a little small segment of their activities.
Exactly. And they are doing development research. So we actually do partner with them on certain things. They do development work, but they are not bidding on the $10,000 initiatives. If it's not over $5 million, they're not doing it. And as you said, they're known for their financial auditing, for their financial consulting, management consulting. Their development side, while still massive compared to us, is just a fraction of what they do in total.
And so is it a matter of age, number of years in business, or why are some companies so much bigger and others are? I understand you are a very young company, so I mean, it would be unreasonable to expect, to become like PricewaterhouseCoopers in a matter of 5 years. I mean, obviously it's unrealistic. But why do some companies break out? Is it a matter of luck, connections, or there is something special about them that they eventually become so powerful?
It's the model and it's the sector. So someone like PricewaterhouseCooper, PwC, they did not start in development research. They have been doing 100 years of financial auditing and things like that. Only when they develop these huge portfolios is it a natural kind of progression to use those in the developing world and do development research. So it came a lot later. The organizations that do strictly evaluation and research for the governments, they're usually a little older, and that is their only client. So let's say you're one of our close partners, Dexis Consulting, they're called. They do exactly what we do, but at a much larger scale. So they do it.
We have them at the list.
Do we have them somewhere?
No, I don't see them.
Oh, actually, you can go up a little bit more. DAI.
Oh, that's the ones? Okay.
No, but that's another one. So DAI is one of the U.S. government's biggest contractors. They, do $200 million a year. Their only client is the U.S. government. So they worked for a long, long time to develop this. Now they've really come into themselves, but they actually started in South Sudan just like we did.
Huh. And it seems like they're 46 years old. So that's, half a century. So that's quite an age.
Exactly. It's a little bit of time, and then it's also focus. We do it differently. If you're going to be a large government contractor, you have an office in DC. You have maybe 30 staff that are, concerned with contracting, administration, finance, and then to actually do the work, you often subcontract it to an organization like ours that actually does it. So we're a little different. We're a boots on the ground, fieldwork specialty kind of place. We have 200 staff across Africa. 85% of those are national staff members from these countries. So it's more about, we're trying to build our base to be able to do work anywhere in the world. We're not yet at that point, and we didn't make it our model to learn how to deal with US and British and all these government contracts, which is just a whole nother game in itself and brings a whole nother skill set.
So I assume they're more kind of politicians in a sense, or work with politicians, whereas you are actually doing the field work.
Yeah. I'd say there are a lot of accountants. There are a lot of compliance officers. When you get a contract from the US government, that's like 400 pages long. And if you mess that one up, you're going to jail for a really long time. So they're making sure that everything is exactly compliant with every OFAC and FCPA, measure. It's down to the cent is accounted for. It's just a whole nother thing. And as you can see, I'm here in my apartment in DC, and that is our office because I'm here as a representative in this city, but our work is done across Africa and the Middle East.
Didn't you just come back from Africa?
I did. I just spent about 3 weeks in Mozambique. It's our newest office in Maputo, which I'm really happy to see. And I love to share that in the last couple of semesters, a lot of great reports suggested Mozambique. One of, if not our winner, it may have been our winner or if our top one last semester, but there was some fantastic information that we really utilized in starting our office.
Wow.
And it's extremely blossomed. And we're really, really growing quickly there.
Yeah. So if you would like to spend all your time in Washington, D.C. with political sharks, then go work for DAA. But if you want to have some fun in Mozambique and whatever other countries he gets to go every month, go and work for Forcier if you can get a job. Absolutely. Ian is very much like, I don't know, in my view, it's more like Indiana Jones because you go to all those, cool, exotic places. Anyway, Ian, if we can take a quick look at the list, do you see any companies that are definitely bad choice? And can you explain why they are bad choice? Let me just scroll down. Maybe you can identify some that you either don't recognize and you think it's a bad idea altogether, or perhaps you know that company and you know it's not a very good fit, and explain why that is a bad choice.
Well, so I think that there are some of those massive ones like PwC. I just saw Ernst & Young. That's another KPMG. Those are, they're just too big. So Ernst & Young, first of all, that's mostly
exactly that. It's an audit company, right?
It's an audit company. Yeah. And so this is the biggest, I think, difficulty in working with our company on this X Culture Challenge is being able to identify development research versus financial auditing and market research. Very different, although they often involve all of the same processes. So they involve data collection, they involve research, they involve technical design. It's still an evaluation, but it's evaluating something totally different, and there are totally different companies that are created to deal with this kind of thing. So Ernst & Young, they're financial services. They're doing your audits. If you're looking at, I don't know another one of these market research companies off the top of my head, but a lot of these local firms are more market research. So Pepsi will, contract one of these companies to tell them if there's a market for Pepsi in a community in their country.
Right.
So some of them, I think those would probably be the worst choices. But again, I think that, so sector-wise, those are some bad choices. The other bad choices are just the ones that are too big that we could never compete with. Like, I'm not sure if like the World Bank is on here, but we're never going to compete with the World Bank, and something like that.
Also does their own research, because I thought they would be the ones who actually give the money.
Yeah, exactly. That's also the point. They're the ones that will contract us, so they're not on here. But even someone like DAI, like you're absolutely in the right place, and they're doing the right thing. It's just too big. So look at the ORBs, look at the integrities, look at the Altais. Those are the ones that we're really going against head to head. But we're not yet on DAI level.
Okay. All right, let's move on then to the next one. And so here we have the list of clients. So the second question was come up with as many ideas for potential clients. And then, so let's take a look at the list we have here. And then again, maybe you can identify a few that, yes, those potentially could be your clients. And maybe a few that, no, that's a whole different, or they would work with a very different type of company if they needed some sort of research. So here's the list we have from the early track from this semester from 2 weeks ago. I'll just slow this down.
But boss, wait, pause right at the top if you can for a moment. Okay. So this is a good example. Our clients, again, we talked about before, what's a bad client is, the big governments, because we don't really work for them as much. So the African Development Fund, we often cannot go for things that they give because they're too large. They'll probably give it to someone like a smaller organization who will then contract us. So sometimes it happens, but they're really big. And then on the flip side, if you look at the top one, Ubuntu for Development, they're probably a little smaller in their scope for research and on their funding, which means that they will not really have a lot of funding for research and M&E. So let's now stroll down. Look. So Aga Khan, again, really big. We're not quite there yet. American Red Cross, that's a great one. Action Contre la Femme, Action Against Hunger. That's a great one. Africare, great one. These are all global NGOs that work in many countries, or often just a few, but they are receiving large grants and contracts from governments. Basically, if you're receiving a grant from a government, you're going to have to get your project evaluated. So if it's a global NGO, non-governmental organization, or a nonprofit, then we can work with them, and we often do.
Mm-hmm. And so what are the normally sizes of the projects, I guess, or, types of the projects that you work with?
Sure. I mean, they can be small. They can be $5,000, $10,000 for some of our more established offices when we just have, lots and lots of work.
Only your part, only the research part, right?
Only the research part. Oh, sorry. You mean the project
How about
size?
the entire project? And I guess that would be our next question. So can you first maybe give some examples of the specific projects that you either worked on or potentially could work on? And then we'll look at the list provided by the students to see if there are any interesting or maybe any bad examples there.
Sure. So the projects, we usually say that monitoring and evaluation should be 3 to 5% of a total contract value. So if you're given $10 million, 5% would be 500,000.
Really, only 3 to 5%? I thought it should be at least, well, I don't know, maybe I'm also biased, but I thought you should spend at least, 1/10 on actually trying to understand if it worked.
Preaching to the choir. I know it. They really should be larger, but again, sometimes these are really big projects, and sometimes they devote more, sometimes less. Sometimes they can be really ridiculous. Other times they can be very nice. It depends on what you planned for in your proposal. So if you earmark funds and you put a large emphasis on research, then the funds are allocated to it. If you don't and you only focus on implementation, that's the exact money that you will be given, and you will have to come up with the funds for M&E out of nowhere. Sometimes we have $20 million projects that only have $10,000 for research. And I'm no mathematician, but that's real small. So,
but what would be the actual tasks? I mean, those projects would be what, like they build a bridge or they build a hospital, or what exactly?
It'd be more like, let's say you're a media organization and you're implementing radio programs for Ebola across Sierra Leone. So you have $10 million, and what you're going to do is you're going to set up radio stations across the country. You're going to train radio journalists. You're going to train them on their methods. You're going to teach them how to report, and then you're going to set up weekly radio shows where they disperse information about Ebola and all of its, problems and how to stop it. So you spend 2 years building all of those things, and then you contract us later to evaluate if it worked.
And then your job will be to see if that made any difference in the number of incidents, number of diagnoses of Ebola, I guess?
Well, we would more on something like that. We would try and learn if how the attitudes and the behaviors of the people changed. If it was something like that, we would go around, and this is something that we've done, and we would interview 1,000 people in Sierra Leone, and we'd say, what do you know about Ebola? How is it spread? Is it lethal? Things like that. And we'll be able to compare from the beginning on, at first, people said that Ebola is spread through witchcraft. It's spread through people cursing each other. It's, it's an act of God, something like that. Afterwards, after these radio programs and we interview people, we find out that people say Ebola is caused from not washing your hands. It's a transmitted disease. So we're learning how the attitudes and behaviors and knowledge of people change throughout these programs.
Yeah. I see Ernst joined us here in the room. So Ernst, if you hear us, if you wanted to ask a question, just, unmute your microphone anytime and go ahead. And meanwhile, I'll go forward. And so let's take a look at some of the examples of the projects that students here mentioned. Can you maybe comment on some of those, either very good examples of suitable projects or maybe good examples of unsuitable projects for the type of work you do? So I'll just slowly
pause right there again. So one of the projects is Agir, right there. That's actually in Mozambique. I actually had a meeting on that 2 weeks ago.
Really?
So funny enough, it's being implemented by Oxfam in Mozambique, funded through ECHO, the European Commission for Humanitarian something. But they are doing all this programming in Mozambique, and they were curious to contract us to monitor and evaluate some of the civil society organizations within the country that was doing their work. So it's a whole line of processes, but AGIR is a program that is giving money to local organizations, and we would come in and we'd evaluate those organizations. So working for that.
So now with these guys, the budget of this project is 51 million. So if they spend only 5% on evaluation, that's still going to come up to about $2 million, right? So could be a sizable budget, even if it's this small.
Sure. And it can be more and it can be less, and it could depend on the country, you know, something like that in AGIR, that's all over the place. It's so every country is different and doing it differently.
Any other projects here that catch your attention as representatives of either a good example or a bad example? I mean, a good choice or a bad choice?
Yeah, let's look. Well, some of them, I see some of them are NGOs. Like I saw Action Against Hunger right there, the USAID one from IREX.
Which one is it?
Keep going down, right. Wait, where'd it go? Right there, Civil Society and Media Leadership Program in Liberia.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much if it's funded by USAID in some way and it's a development program, so like it's doing like, so what does this do? It's designing the skills, it's improving the skills, performance, and perceptions of civil society organizations through training. So what you would think is you would say eventually they're going to need someone to evaluate how these people, how their skills changed. You know, did this training work? Was the mentoring work? Did they build capacity of journalists? So we would come in Liberia, we'd interview all these people, and we'd find out if they actually work.
Mm-hmm.
But another
go ahead.
Another bad example, I think, is that central contraceptive procurement. Just in the fact that it will need to be evaluated, but it's a different type of evaluation. It's that would be more in the operational evaluation. So you're checking how the organization actually delivered this, you know, service. Did they deliver contraceptive commodities, something like that? So we wouldn't be evaluating the program as much as the organization.
So in this case, it's much more technical or mechanical, I guess.
It's more of an audit. Did they deliver this many things to this, you know, community? Let's check their ledgers. We do that as well, actually, for this kind of thing. So it does work, but less and less.
Okay.
So like CARE, that's an organization, CARE International. Danish Refugee Council, that's an organization.
It's not a project, it's a company.
Yeah.
So it might fit in your client's list, but not in the project list.
Exactly. Okay, wait, right there. Emergency food security and water and sanitation assistance. That's, I think, one that we've actually evaluated.
Oh, okay.
Possibly. If not, then we've done it exactly like it. That's, you know, a great example of World Vision is implementing a program where they are providing food security and water and sanitation assistance. That can be delivering food drops. It can be building latrines in a community, teaching people how to wash their hands, teaching people about nutrition, measuring people's nutritional, you know, if they're malnourished or not. And that is something that we would then go in and evaluate. That is just like a very classic development program that is right up our alley.
That's actually, you have a very cool job and a very meaningful too. I mean,
I think so
much better than just sitting and, you know, filing some sort of TPS reports all day somewhere in front of a computer.
I think so. It's important. It's extremely important. You know, you have to know there's so much money wasted in the world. If we get on a US government tangent, which we could go forever, you look at Afghanistan and billions of dollars was spent there without really knowing what was going on. So something like that, you know, you need to know where it's spent. You need to learn your lessons, or you just propel the same problems that we keep doing and you don't actually solve them. So we need more emphasis on monitoring and evaluation.
And given the total size of aid, if we talk about Africa only, I mean, it's billions of dollars, right?
I mean, the US government is the largest donor in the world. We give, you know, $15 billion across the world, right. And that's just the US government. And a lion's share of that goes for health and in Africa. So
looking at the results, I bet at least probably 30-40%, maybe even half of it is not spent. Like looking back, we now know that we should have spent it differently. And so many, I mean, there are probably so many mistakes that we don't even know about because there was no evaluation, you know, so.
Absolutely.
Anyway, next question would be then related to countries. So where Forcier should move in. And so looking at some of the examples here, I know that some of the countries on the list are not even in Africa. And so, and I know Forcier is primarily interested in Africa. So, but are there any countries here on the list that are very good choices or targets for you, and maybe some that are not so much, and why?
Absolutely. You know, you could pick any country in Africa, and we could work there, and it needs development research for sure. but there are just markets that have been too saturated and are not good for us. So you look at something like Central African Republic and Cameroon, those are fantastic. There are no research firms there. There is a huge absence of information, but a credible amount of humanitarian work that is going on in those countries. So there's tons of funding, there's tons of development programs, but no one to actually evaluate them. So when we talk about what our niche is, we work in logistically complicated environments, often post-conflict zones. It's kind of, conflict zones. We work in South Sudan, and about 3 months ago, we had to evacuate all of our staff. It's extremely challenging places. So our international staff, I should say. So Central African Republic, great choice. We're very curious to learn more about that, something that we do not know a lot about. But if you look at something like Ethiopia, it has been, or Ghana, actually, Ethiopia and Ghana, they're huge recipients of US money, huge, but they're also incredibly stable. So Ghana is a better selection of, we would not do a lot of work there. It has a ton of competitive firms. People are working in Ghana, and it's not as difficult to operate in. I studied at the University of Ghana, actually, and it's a wonderful country, but it's just easier to work in South Sudan. And so there are already a lot of competitors, and it's not as good for us to work in.
So you're the crazy guys who are looking for places where you have to go with a bodyguard to jobs and, in an armored vehicle.
Oh, absolutely. Security convoys, armored vehicles, that's definitely something that we're dealing with.
That is actually cool. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'd like to have a job where I have to have a bodyguard and an armored vehicle, but I guess,
it's tough. And, that's the reason why our model is so innovative. You're not sending someone like me to go interview al-Shabaab militants in Mogadishu, which is a study that we do. I would not get very good data, and I also would be kidnapped. So we are, working with our local researchers that are from these places. They know these communities. They know the culture and the language because they're from them, and they're doing research on their own places. What's so important for our company, and is so important in my eyes, is you want to avoid the neocolonialist attitude of a bunch of Americans working in Africa, because that is not what we're about, and that is what we go against a lot. We're about collaboration. And when you talk about doing business in Africa, it's the most important thing. How do you combine the amazing resources, the amazing capacity and skill of citizens of these countries with international expertise? So for us, it's how do you use these amazing national researchers that can go and collect this fantastic data, but combine it with our PhD methodologists and statisticians to design really innovative research and write fantastic reports. So it's that working together that's really the key to our success, and we're really passionate about.
Yeah, that's exactly what Jan and Natalie were invited to talk about at the upcoming Academy of International Business Conference. So there will be lots of academics there, but also lots of businessmen, and they would like to learn how to do business in Africa effectively, because as Jan said, the old neo-colonist, as you said, approach may not be the most effective one long-term. So.
Yeah, Africa is a continent that has 54 diverse countries and incredible opportunity. It's not a continent to be exploited. It's a continent that can be developed in collaboration with, the people.
I know Jan has an appointment at 11, but 2 more minutes. Just let's take a very quick look at this last question, the operating costs. One of the question asks to find out the prices of transportation, lodging, maybe security and things like that. And so students would look at different countries and try to estimate those costs. So when you look at these answers, any feedback? Anything interesting, or perhaps something that you see there?
So this is a hard one. It's really difficult. If you stop at the top, it's actually a good example. It's really hard to get these costs. Even, myself, I work in business development. I'm writing proposals all the time. What I propose as what I think is an internal cost tends to be 10 times cheaper or 10 times more expensive when we get in the country. Especially, we know our countries so well, but when we don't know the countries that we're working in, if we're doing a one-off project in Chad, let's say, it's very hard to estimate without going on the ground and talking. So I think like Rwanda, $68 for an enumerator. It's a little high, but it's pretty close. If you go down to Kenya, $420 to $600 a day for an enumerator. That's what a PhD advisor on a U.S. government project could make. So definitely not a local
monthly salary, I'm guessing, because it's way too high. Even by the U.S. standards for one day.
Yeah, yeah. But some of these are really on target. I think that, like, translators, they can be really expensive. Often researchers are pretty low. Like team supervisors and qualitative researchers, enumerators, they can be not so high. But I think these are actually really on target. The per diems as well, like around 15 to 20. You just always have to know, like, the US dollar goes a long way in many African countries. Long way. So whatever you think it is in terms of expensive, it's probably half of that.
So then one last question. So if students were trying to estimate those figures, what's the best way to do it? Literally try to find somebody there, call and ask, or maybe do it online, or what's the best way to get the accurate figures?
It's a tough one. I think that connections are really how we do it and how we guess. I mean, a lot of it is intuition on our part, but I think that asking around networks, connecting with other companies, connecting with local researchers or people is really the best way. If you know someone from Ghana, talk to someone from Ghana. That's the best way.
Yeah, makes sense. All right,
but that's
so
difficult.
We'll stop here because I know you have only 10 minutes before your next teleconference. So thank you so much. As discussed, let's try to do it again maybe in a month or so, and by that time we will have some teams that are almost done with their projects, and maybe we will ask them to present what they have, and then you will provide feedback on their work, and so this will provide also some indication as to the right direction for the people in the early track that at that time will only be starting. So hopefully that would
be great. And as I always say, I'm happy to answer any questions that you really can't figure out. Send them my way. Send them to Vas. I will absolutely answer them to the best of my ability.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, as always, great pleasure. And oops, I guess I switched off my video. So thank you, Jan, and we will be in touch again soon. When are you going to Africa?
All right, sounds great. You too. See you.
When are you going to Africa again?
Next month, off to Johannesburg and Cape Town.
Cool. All right, have a nice day. Thank you, everyone.
You too, Vas. See you around.
Bye-bye.